There was a moment when the world expected Iran to respond immediately. Television channels were counting missiles, military analysts were tracking fighter jets. Oil traders were preparing for another shock, and American warships moved closer to one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. Everyone was asking the same question: when will Iran strike? But almost nobody asked a far more dangerous question. What if Iran's objective was never to win a conventional war against America in the first place? Because if that is true, then the entire conflict looks completely different. For decades, the United States has built the most powerful military machine in human history. 11 aircraft carriers, hundreds of overseas bases, stealth bombers, nuclear submarines, global surveillance satellites. No country on Earth can match that level of military reach. So why would any nation willingly confront such a superpower? The simple answer is, it wouldn't, at least not in the way America expects. That is where Iran's strategy becomes far more interesting than its weapons. Because the goal may never have been to destroy American power. The goal may have been to change how that power is forced to operate. And history shows this isn't a new idea. More than 2,400 years ago, the Persian Empire understood something that many powerful civilizations learned too late. Sometimes the fastest way to challenge a stronger enemy is not by attacking its strength, but by forcing that strength to become a burden. It sounds impossible until you look at what has happened across the Middle East during the last 2 decades. America won battles. It demonstrated overwhelming military superiority. Yet the region never became simpler. Every military success seemed to create a new strategic problem. One conflict led to another. One deployment required another deployment. One alliance demanded another commitment. Slowly, the battlefield stopped being measured in kilometers. It started being measured in time, and time is the one resource no superpower can manufacture. Today, the Middle East is no longer just a regional conflict. It is a crossroads where military strategy, global energy markets, international diplomacy, and great power competition collide. Every decision made in Washington is watched in Tehran. Every statement from Tehran is analyzed in Tel Aviv. Every movement in the Persian Gulf is monitored in Beijing, Moscow, Brussels, and London. This is no longer a local conflict. It is a global chessboard, and one narrow stretch of water sits at the center of it all. The Strait of Hormuz. On a map, it looks almost insignificant, but appearances can be deceptive. A significant portion of the world's seaborne oil trade passes through this narrow passage. That means any rise in tensions there is immediately reflected far beyond the Middle East. Insurance companies react. Shipping firms reconsider routes. Energy markets become nervous. Governments begin discussing emergency plans. Notice something important. None of this requires a single missile to be launched. Sometimes the possibility of disruption is enough to reshape global behavior. That is why modern conflicts are no longer fought only with weapons. They are fought with uncertainty. And uncertainty has become one of the most powerful strategic tools in international politics. America understands this. Iran understands this. Every regional actor understands this. Which brings us to the question that almost nobody asks: if the objective isn't necessarily to defeat America militarily, then what exactly is the objective? The answer may lie in changing the cost of American power itself, because power is never free. Every carrier strike group deployed to the region requires thousands of sailors, escort ships, fuel, maintenance logistics, intelligence, air support, political approval. Every additional deployment consumes resources. Every extended mission reduces flexibility elsewhere. And when a nation carries global responsibilities, every new commitment competes with another priority somewhere else. That doesn't make America weak. It makes global leadership extraordinarily expensive. Perhaps that is why modern strategy has changed so dramatically. Instead of asking, how do we destroy our opponent? The more important question has become, how do we force our opponent to spend more time, more attention, and more resources than they expected? Because once that happens, the battlefield is no longer defined by firepower alone. It becomes a contest of endurance. And throughout history, endurance has often defeated strength. Every empire believes its greatest advantage will protect it forever. History suggests something very different. The Roman Empire believed its vast legions could secure every frontier. Britain believed its unmatched navy guaranteed global dominance. The Soviet Union believed military strength could compensate for economic pressure. None of them collapsed because they suddenly became weak. They gradually discovered that maintaining power can sometimes become harder than acquiring it. That lesson matters today because modern warfare no longer rewards only the strongest army. It rewards the side that understands pressure. Pressure isn't always created by bombs. Sometimes it is created by uncertainty. Imagine you are sitting inside the Pentagon. Every morning begins with the same question. What happens next? Will another missile be launched? Will another regional militia become involved? Will commercial shipping remain unaffected? Will oil prices rise again? Will another ally request additional military support? Each unanswered question forces planners to prepare for multiple possibilities at once. And preparation is expensive. Far more expensive than most people realize. People often see an American aircraft carrier and think only about power. What they don't see are the thousands of people working behind it. The logistics, ships, the intelligence aircraft, the satellite networks, the maintenance crews, the fuel supply, the replacement parts, the diplomatic negotiations allowing those ships to operate from friendly ports. Military power is like an iceberg. The visible part is enormous. The invisible part is even larger. That is exactly why modern conflicts are no longer decided only by who owns the better weapons. They're decided by who forces the other side to keep using those weapons. The longer the pressure continues, the more expensive every decision becomes. Now look at Iran from a completely different perspective. Its military planners have always understood one simple reality. They cannot compete with America dollar for dollar. According to publicly available estimates, the United States spends several times more on defense each year than Iran. Trying to match that directly would be impossible. So instead of asking, how do we build a bigger military? The more logical question becomes, how do we make America's bigger military solve smaller and smaller problems? That changes everything. Because once a superpower begins using billion-dollar assets to respond to relatively low-cost challenges, the economic equation slowly starts changing. Military strategists sometimes describe this as forcing an opponent into an unfavorable cost exchange. The objective isn't necessarily to destroy expensive equipment. It's to make expensive systems remain continuously engaged. Think about that for a moment. If an aircraft carrier worth billions of dollars has to remain deployed month after month, if advanced missile defense systems must stay on constant alert, if surveillance aircraft continue flying daily missions, if additional naval patrols become routine, the financial burden grows even when no major battle takes place. This is one reason prolonged tensions concern governments more than short crises. Short crises usually have clear objectives. Long crises slowly consume attention. Attention may be the most underestimated resource in international politics. Every hour spent managing one crisis is an hour unavailable for another. And America today isn't focused on only one region. There is Europe, the Indo-Pacific, Taiwan, the South China Sea, cybersecurity, space, artificial intelligence, global supply chains. Every challenge competes for the same military planners, the same intelligence agencies, the same political leadership. That creates a strategic dilemma, not because America lacks capability, but because no country possesses unlimited time. Meanwhile, something else has quietly transformed modern warfare. Information. 30 years ago, governments controlled most battlefield information. Today, a satellite image can appear online within hours. Commercial ships broadcast their movements. Videos spread across social media before official statements are released. Financial markets react instantly. Public opinion changes overnight. This means every military action now produces two battles, the physical battle and the information battle. Sometimes the second becomes even more important than the first, because perception influences politics. Politics influence strategy. Strategy influences military decisions. Everything is connected. That connection explains why governments carefully choose every public statement. One sentence can move markets. One announcement can reassure allies. One misunderstanding can increase regional tensions. In today's world, words have become strategic tools, just like missiles. And perhaps that is the biggest change of all. Modern conflicts are no longer fought only on land, or at sea, or in the air. They are fought inside financial markets, inside media narratives, inside diplomatic negotiations, inside technology, and inside the minds of decision makers. Which raises one final question. If wars are increasingly being fought across so many different battlefields at the same time, can military superiority alone ever be enough? Or has the definition of victory itself already begun to change? The answer depends on how we define victory. For most of human history, victory meant capturing territory, raise your flag, occupy the capital, force the enemy to surrender. The war was over, but the 21st century has changed that definition. Today, countries can lose billions of dollars without losing a single city. They can suffer strategic setbacks without a single tank crossing their borders. And sometimes, simply forcing an opponent to remain permanently engaged can become a form of success. That is why military planners increasingly talk about strategic exhaustion rather than decisive victory. Not because wars have become less dangerous, but because they have become more complicated. Take a closer look at the Middle East. For decades, the region has remained one of the most strategically sensitive places on Earth, not only because of oil, not only because of religion, but because almost every major global power has interests there. America wants regional stability and secure shipping lanes. Israel wants long-term security. Iran wants to prevent hostile military pressure near its borders. The Gulf states want economic stability. Europe depends heavily on uninterrupted trade. China imports massive amounts of energy. Russia watches every shift in American military priorities. Suddenly, one regional conflict becomes an international balancing act. This explains why even relatively small incidents sometimes receive enormous global attention. Because nobody is looking only at the incident itself. Everyone is asking a much bigger question. What happens next? That question drives modern strategy. Every government tries to stay one step ahead. Every intelligence agency searches for hidden intentions. Every military planner prepares for multiple scenarios at once. And every preparation costs money. Lots of it. Military budgets rarely tell the full story. Beyond soldiers and equipment lies an enormous support system: fuel, transportation, satellite communications, cybersecurity, medical support, training, replacement parts, maintenance, research. Artificial intelligence. Every new capability demands another investment. Power grows, but so do responsibilities. That relationship creates an interesting paradox. The stronger a military becomes, the more expensive it becomes to keep that strength ready. Military readiness is not a switch that can simply be turned on during emergencies. It requires constant preparation, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That preparation continues whether a war begins tomorrow or never begins at all. This is where geography quietly returns to the center of the story. The Persian Gulf isn't important because of its size. It's important because of its location. It connects producers with consumers, tankers with markets, regional politics with the global economy. Every major economy pays attention to what happens there. When uncertainty rises, energy traders notice, insurance companies notice, shipping companies notice, governments notice, financial markets notice. The ripple spreads far beyond the region itself. This is why economists often say that markets dislike uncertainty more than bad news. Bad news can be measured, uncertainty cannot, and uncertainty influences behavior. Companies delay investments, importers review contracts, governments reconsider emergency reserves, military commanders reassess deployments. Nobody waits for the worst-case scenario. They prepare long before it arrives. Preparation itself changes reality. Perhaps that is the most overlooked feature of modern geopolitics. The possibility of disruption can become almost as influential as disruption itself. This doesn't mean conflict becomes inevitable. Far from it. In fact, much of modern strategy is designed to prevent direct confrontation. Deterrence exists precisely because every side understands the enormous costs of escalation. The stronger the weapons become, the greater the incentive to avoid using them. That creates a strange balance. Governments demonstrate strength while simultaneously trying to avoid crossing certain thresholds. They send signals, but avoid irreversible decisions. They increase pressure while leaving room for diplomacy. To outsiders, these actions sometimes appear contradictory, but inside strategic planning, they often make perfect sense because diplomacy and military power are not opposites. They usually work together. Military capability strengthens negotiating positions. Diplomatic agreements reduce military risks. Neither completely replaces the other. That balance has shaped international politics for generations. Yet one challenge remains unchanged. No strategy survives forever. Technology changes, leadership changes, alliances change, economic conditions change. What worked 10 years ago may no longer work today, and what appears effective today may become obsolete tomorrow. History moves faster than most governments expect. That is exactly why every major power constantly reassesses its assumptions, not because it enjoys uncertainty, but because uncertainty has become the defining feature of modern international relations. So perhaps the biggest question isn't whether one country is stronger than another. Perhaps the real question is this: who adapts faster when the rules of the game begin to change? Because history has shown something remarkable. The countries that shape the future are rarely the ones that simply possess the greatest power. They are the ones that recognize a changing world before everyone else. But there is one final piece of this puzzle that almost nobody talks about. It's not missiles, it's not aircraft carriers, it's not even nuclear weapons. It's something far less visible. The economy. Every modern war eventually arrives at the same destination: money. Because armies don't fight on patriotism alone, they fight on fuel, factories, supply chains, microchips, food, shipping, finance. Without those, even the world's strongest military begins slowing down. That is why economists often describe today's global economy as one enormous web. Pull one thread and vibrations spread everywhere. Imagine a single oil tanker delayed in the Persian Gulf. That delay affects shipping schedules. Shipping schedules affect refinery deliveries. Refinery delays affect fuel prices. Fuel prices affect transportation. Transportation affects food. Food affects inflation. Inflation affects interest rates. Interest rates affect businesses. Businesses affect jobs. One regional crisis can quietly reach millions of people who have never even heard of the Strait of Hormuz. That is why governments monitor this region so closely. Not because every incident becomes a war, but because every incident carries the possibility of becoming something larger. Now think about America's position. Its responsibilities stretch across nearly every continent: European allies, Asian allies, Middle Eastern partners, global trade routes, international financial stability, cybersecurity, space security, counterterrorism. Every new challenge demands attention, and attention is limited. Military planners understand something that rarely appears in headlines. Every ship deployed in one region cannot simultaneously be somewhere else. Every squadron assigned to one mission becomes unavailable for another. Every intelligence analyst focused on one crisis spends less time studying another. This isn't weakness, it's mathematics. Stores are always finite. Priorities constantly compete. That is why strategy is never about having unlimited power. It's about deciding where that power matters most. And this is exactly where America's biggest competitors pay attention. Not because they expect an immediate confrontation, but because they carefully observe how American resources are distributed around the world. If one region suddenly demands more military attention, another region inevitably receives less. That calculation influences decisions far beyond the Middle East. From Eastern Europe to the South China Sea, governments quietly watch every deployment, every exercise, every announcement, because military movements often communicate intentions long before politicians speak. Sometimes, a single naval deployment sends a stronger diplomatic message than 100 speeches. But there is another battlefield growing even faster: technology. Artificial intelligence is changing intelligence gathering. Satellite imagery is becoming commercially available. Drones have become cheaper, more accurate, and increasingly autonomous. Cyber operations can disrupt infrastructure without firing a single shot. The next major geopolitical crisis may not begin with explosions. It may begin with hacked networks, disrupted communications, financial instability, or misinformation spreading across millions of phones within minutes. The battlefield has expanded: land, sea, air, space, cyberspace, information, economics, all connected. That makes predicting the future extraordinarily difficult, which is why responsible analysts rarely make absolute predictions. History has punished certainty more than uncertainty. The truth is, no one knows exactly what the next decade will look like. Will tensions ease? Will diplomacy succeed? Will competition intensify? Nobody can honestly promise the answer. But history gives us one valuable lesson. The countries that survive turbulent eras are usually not the ones that refuse to change. They are the ones that adapt faster than everyone else. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson hidden inside the relationship between Iran and America. This story was never only about two countries. It was about how power itself is changing. From tanks to technology, from territory to economics, from overwhelming force to strategic endurance. The world is entering an era where victory may no longer belong only to the strongest military. It may belong to the country that can better combine military capability, economic resilience, technological innovation, diplomatic influence, and the patience to outlast every crisis. Because in the end, history doesn't remember who looked strongest at the beginning of the game. It remembers who was still standing when the game finally ended. The next global conflict, if it ever comes, may not be decided by who fires the first shot, but by who is prepared for the longest future.